very important seminar conversation. Today, we're going to be examining the situation in Poland with the new legislation regarding history and criticism and free speech in contemporary Poland. We have three amazing people with us. It's really an honor that they are with us. We have Natan Sharansky, who everybody online must know is he's dedicated his life to the Jewish people. He was a dissident in the Soviet Union and fought for the freedom of the Jewish people and for human rights in the Soviet Union. He spent 9 years in a Soviet prison, and upon his release, he left and made aliyah to Israel, where he became a political leader in Israel and also, I think, a international leader for human rights and of the Jewish community in the diaspora. After leaving politics, he served in the Israeli government. After leaving politics, he headed the Jewish Agency for 9 years. Natan has written 3 books and has received many awards and special accolades over the years, including the Congressional Medal of Freedom. And it's an amazing privilege for us that he's chairing ISGAP currently. I also have a special pleasure to introduce to you Aleksandra Gliszczyńska-Grabias. I'm sorry for anglicizing your name, Alex. Alex is an assistant professor at the Institute of Law Studies of the Polish Academy of Science. She's from Poland with a background in national policy and legal expertise in the fields of international human rights law, constitutional law, issues of freedom of speech, and the laws of memory. She's a graduate of the Faculty of Law of the Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznan, Poland. And in 2012, she successfully defended her PhD thesis on countering anti-Semitism with the tools of international law. And I had the real pleasure of working with Alex at Yale. She was one of our research scholars at the research center that we ran at Yale. And she's a widely published author, and she's won many awards as well. And she recently co-authored a book of Law and Memory Towards Legal Governance of History, which was published by Cambridge University Press. We also have the I don't have Jan's biography. Okay, I have it. Sorry. Jan Grabowski is from the Department of History at the University of Ottawa. His research includes issues surrounding the extermination of the Polish Jewish community, as well as the history of Polish-Jewish relations from 1939 to 1945. He's the author of several important monographs, which includes The Hunt for the Jews, Betrayal and Murder in German-Occupied Poland. This was published by Indiana Press. And it also won the Yad Vashem International Book Prize in 2014. Professor Grabowski has recently completed a project that deals with the involvement of the Polish Blue and criminal police in the Holocaust. His current research focuses on open ghettos in Poland, and he's won many important awards and prizes. In 2020, he was named the Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, and was a distinguished fellow at the Institute for Zeitkunst in Munich, sorry for the pronunciation, in Munich. And I had the pleasure of hosting Jan years ago at McGill in one of our seminar series. And as many of you know, Jan is standing up and standing up to the oppressive laws that were recently passed in Poland, and standing up for academic freedom and the freedom to express issues of memory, particularly with the Holocaust. And Alex is also helping in this struggle. So these are two very important guests at this, I don't know what the right adjectives are, but this important historical moment in time regarding anti-Semitism and democracy. So Natan, the floor is yours to open
Thank you, dear friends.
Important.
Thank you, dear friends. I'm really very glad for this opportunity to be with you and to welcome Professor Grabowski and Dr. Aleksandra Gliszczyńska-Grabias. Both of them are courageously challenging the power at this moment when they try to establish their control over the history. And I don't want to take much of the time. No, I don't want to take any of the time, but I want to share some thoughts about relations between power and history. I grew in the Soviet Union. I was born a few years after Holocaust, and we grew knowing nothing about Holocaust. I was playing in the killing fields of Holocaust. Only 7, 8 years ago, so many people were killed in the same place, and knew nothing about Holocaust. Because power authorities decided that they have to control people fully, their strong identities of the people. It's their enemy because they're competing for loyalty of these people. And they really decided to raise strong identities of everybody, and they had special problems with Jews. So to raise strong Jewish identity, they had to raise the memory of Holocaust. And in more general terms, we grew under the system which controlled fully the lives and minds of 200 million people. And they also, an important part of this was that they controlled the history. Usually it is that people don't know what is in the future, but they know very clearly what was in the past. Here it was interesting. It was very clear what will be the future. The future is communism, and everybody is studying about this future communism. And there are laws of society which are bringing us directly there. But the past is changing practically every day. I am receiving, when I was a small child, we started receiving the volumes of Soviet encyclopedia, and for the next 15 years, they were published, these volumes. Every few months, there were some new pages sent because now the attitude to this person or to this event is changing in accordance with the needs of the political power. So history really belonged to the political power, and they were dealing with this in the way which guarantees them full control over the people. And it's interesting that when I became a dissident, and I had many friends, democratic dissidents, nationalists, Armenians, Ukrainians, Lithuanians, we had no problem discussing with them the most difficult moments of the history, including the Holocaust, because the moment people are building their power, not through their own freedom and identity, and not trying to impose anything on the others, they have no problem. Not only they don't have a problem, they are interested in serious discussion. And when they're challenging me by why so many Jews were supporting communist regime, I had no problem to condemn these Jews and to discuss what were the conditions which brought to this situation, and vice versa. So it was very natural for me that when communism fell apart and all these nations and countries became free, anti-Semitism practically disappeared. At least that was the feeling, that anti-Semitism disappeared, and definitely memory about the Holocaust is coming back, and the serious discussions about our tragedies are put on the agenda. And that is why the fact that today there are in Poland, in Hungary, in some Baltic republics, some other places in Eastern Europe, you can feel how there is returning the attempt to tell people, no, the history, to play with the identity of the people, with the national pride, in order to prohibit certain parts of the history, prohibit open discussion. It says that some authorities are not really interested in strengthening this deep connection between identity and freedom. That authorities are interested to establish some kind of control of the people from whom they want to take control over their history. And that's why we all have to remember, those who want to control your past, they in fact want to control your future. And that's why every precedent of such attempts to establish control, to prohibit open exchange of opinions and information, discussion of anything in the history, is a dangerous precedent, not for Jews, not for this or one historical professor, but for this nation. No nation should accept that authorities are establishing any control on discussing their history. And with this, I want to ask our distinguished scientists and fighters for freedom of speech and freedom of talking and learning about history. Please, you're welcome.
So should I start at this point? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. It's really an honor for me to be, let's say, introduced by Natan Sharansky, who was my personal hero, and I was still back many years ago in Poland when we were still, reading in samizdat about your travails, about your fate. So once again, thank you for these kind words. And without further ado, I would like to plunge into the subject. Now, my role here, as I was given to understand, is basically to give the historical background, and then my intrepid and courageous lawyer, Dr. Gliszczyńska-Grabias, will follow up with the legal consequences of a situation that I am describing. Now, I assume you don't have, I have to assume that you have no profound knowledge of this topic, so very quickly. I will start with two very shocking results of recent polls which have been conducted in Poland on a large group of respondents. In one of these polls, the respondents were asked who suffered more during the occupation, during World War II, the Poles or the Jews. And the resounding response in 70% of respondents said that either both nations suffered equally or Poles suffered more. So this is one part of the poll. Another one revealed that 19%, or close to every fifth respondent, 19% declared that war was a very bad thing, but it's actually good because of this war, Poland doesn't have as many Jews as it used to have. The poll has been conducted in February of 2021, 1 month ago. So you have 20%, nearly 20% of respondents who say that war was a bad thing. However, it's good because it led us to get rid of the Jews. Now, this is one poll. The second poll asked a very straightforward question. Would you agree that historians who write about Polish complicity in the Holocaust should be charged in court? Well, 39% declared that yes. Now, the interesting thing is that the question was formulated not in a way, would you like to charge historians who lie about Polish complicity? No, the question was, do you agree to charge historians who write about Polish complicity in the Holocaust? So you have here nearly 40% of respondents, with 10% of those who are not certain, who actually would like to place in prison people who write truth about Polish complicity in the Holocaust. Now, so with these two, I would say, fairly shocking observations, I would like to show you or give you a bit of a background to this story. I don't have much time, so I will keep to bare essentials, and I'm certain that later on, if you are interested, we can go deeper in the question period. So, a few months ago, my dear friend, Professor Yehuda Bauer of Yad Vashem, published an important article in which he used the term usable past. Basically, he was describing a situation that governments nowadays want to write themselves a usable past, a past which they can put to a good use in order to promote any kind of national myths, mythology, legends, or identity politics that they seem to like. Professor Bauer actually focused on Poland as one of the most egregious examples of this kind of making or rewriting history. So this is one thing. The second thing is, so creating usable past has become an important part usually of authoritarian regimes, such as the regime currently in power in Poland, but also in Hungary, mind you, and many democratic governments are also tempted to follow the suit. It seems to be a nice little identity building project that they can do if they are not, let's say, confronted head on by historians, and usually they are not. So the second thing is that, as all of you know, we are dealing most of the time with so-called, very often, we are dealing with so-called Holocaust denial, which we know how to fight more or less, and we know that this is a fringe. Normally, it's a fringe. People who subscribe to this particular area of insanity, so to say, make themselves, let's say, not, as the Germans call it, salonunfähig. In other words, they are not admissible in a good society, in a polite society. However, what we face today in the case of Poland, but also in the case of other countries, is something that is being referred to as Holocaust distortion. Now, it is much more actually dangerous than negating the factuality of the Holocaust. The distortionists, and there are many brands of them, what they say basically is, well, yes, the Jews have been murdered, no question here. However, our tribe, our people, our ethnicity, we had in our nation, we had nothing to do with it. If, you know, some fringe elements harmed the Jews, well, they removed themselves from our national community. The new term coming back after 80 years, Volksgemeinschaft, national community, is actually making a career nowadays in Poland. Now, so what happens here? So we have the problem, we have the ideology, and now what are the national myths which trigger knee-jerk, hostile, violent reactions on the part of institutions of the Polish state, which make the situation that myself, that I, and Dr. Aleksandra Gliszczyńska-Grabias are here today in order to share our experiences. Well, so national mythology in Poland is this identity project being constructed by the currently governing or ruling nationalists is based upon this assumption of national innocence at the time of World War II. That Polish society has been a victim of the World War II, which is entirely true, and that Polish society massively, consequently helped the Jews, which is a patent lie. Now, Polish society, of course, has been a victim of World War II, but unfortunately, segments of Polish society, and there is no doubt about it, engaged in various kinds of activities which determined in a very tragic way the fate of the Jews, especially in the so-called post-liquidation area, which is 1942 and later, when the Jews lost all right to live, and hundreds of thousands of them sought refuge on so-called Aryan side. So the national mythology that the currently ruling nationalists espouse would like to see the record purged of any kind of discussion, and God forbid, a discussion in terms of, let's say, describing the massive character of anti-Jewish activities performed by the members of the Polish society and by organizations or institutions involving Poles, ethnic Poles. So all of this is a part of this project to keep sanitize, if you will, Polish history, and to keep it usable, as Yehuda Bauer mentioned. What is also happening is the de-Judaization of the Holocaust. However illogical, however difficult to understand it can seem. Well, what is the de-Judaization of the Holocaust? Well, the Jews, according to nationalists, are not your ideal, let's say, members of national pantheon. They are not. They are. It's hard to remove the Jews from the Holocaust, but it's possible, as we have learned. What the Polish authorities do is they will place extraordinary stress on so-called righteous Poles who were saving the Jews during the war, making the Jews basically irrelevant. It's the virtue of Christians, it's the virtue in this case of Polish citizens who selflessly and massively helped their Jewish brothers and sisters at the time of need. The fact that actually Polish Gentiles, people who were involved in this extraordinary brave activity, were doing so at the great personal risk, not only because of death penalty introduced by the Germans, which was of course true, but because of hostile attitudes of their own peers, of their own neighbors, who were very likely to report them to the nearest station of the German or Polish police. In any case, there is a set of myths in defense of which the Polish state created. I still have a few minutes, so I'm here looking at the clock, but I still have a few minutes. So the thing is, in order to defend these myths, the Polish state mobilized all or very many of its resources. The problem is that for the nationalists, it's in power. This part of history, it's not a part-time fantasy. It's not a whim. This project, this identity project, which involves the distortion of the history of the Holocaust, is at the very center of who these people are. This is what makes them who they are, and this is how they mobilize their electorate. Okay, this is very important. It's a political dimension. They don't care whether one country or another will be offended. What they want to do is to mobilize their electorate, and nothing mobilizes their electorate better than a common enemy. In this case, you have the eternal Jew, but there are different kinds of hostile forces out there for them. Now, so in order to protect these myths, the state mobilized, for instance, weaponized law. But this I will leave, of course, to Dr. Gliszczyńska-Grabias to discuss further the legal issues. So you have all heard about the Polish Holocaust law. But from my historian's perspective, equally, or perhaps even more dangerous, is the existence and growth, cancerous, I would say, growth of powerful institution of memory control, such as the Institute of National Remembrance, which has a budget of more than $100 million per year, institution created in order to enforce the official state narrative in matters of history. And their focus, for instance, the focus on destroying the book of which I am co-author and co-editor, has been extraordinary. The resources they have are limitless. And now there is another small institutions, which I will mention here because it's flying under the radar without a real reason. It should be out there. It's called Pilecki Institute, and this institution is flying to your town. They try to open their boutique in New York in the nearest few months, which I hope will not happen. But these institutions are involved in something that we call distortion of the history of the Holocaust, so this is the background. Now, a few words in the few remaining minutes I have about the book. So imagine that for many, many years, 6 years or so, I led or co-led with my colleague, Professor Engelking, a team of 9 scholars, 6 years of work. We were looking at what happened, what was the fate of the Jews in after the liquidation of the ghettos in 9 selected counties of occupied Poland. Now, finally, we published in the middle of this huge outburst of anger surrounding the Polish Holocaust law in 2018, right smack in the middle of this campaign of interest. We published our 2 volumes, 1,700 pages, a very academic book, which triggered all possible hostile, violent reactions on the part of Polish nationalists, be they represented by the Polish state or acting on their own, but a wave of state-inspired hate, which still lasts, which still goes on, which knows, I would say, no parallel in Polish history in terms of historical works. I cannot even imagine from afar any historical book that would have gathered a storm, officially sponsored storm of hate of these proportions. I'm not going to details in the questions perhaps, but so basically what are our these concluding my remarks, what are our findings which triggered this extraordinary festival of hate triggered by the state? Well, one thing is we were looking for the most part on the Jewish victims, but in Poland, very few people actually are concerned with the Jews or Jewish victims. The focus was not on the Jews. The state reaction was triggered by what we wrote about the Poles. And we said that in a vast majority of cases, Jews who tried to survive after the liquidation of the ghettos have been denounced or murdered by their Polish neighbors or simply other Poles. And we could prove it on the basis of numbers. So it's not a question of more or less. We were going to the level of individual trajectories. If you look at micro research, which we performed, this is what can be done. Of course, it doesn't mean that there are no errors. There always are errors, but we were able to present some firm data. Second, we were able to present that the German machinery of terror, of extermination, was supplied, was, let's say, assisted by various institutions in which Polish ethnic Poles took part, that without this involvement of crowds of people who somehow made their own humble contribution to the extermination of the Jews, the German effort would have been much more difficult and much less complete. So these are the facts. And then we heard from Prime Minister of Poland, Morawiecki, in June of 2018, that the Polish government will not put historians in prison, but it will apply the rules of civil litigation to bankrupt us and to run us into the ground. So what happens is exactly what Prime Minister Morawiecki promised 2.5 years ago, or close to it. So I have many other things I would like to share, but I believe my time is up. So I will switch my mic off and transfer it to Dr. Gliszczyńska-Grabias.
So Jan, thank you so much for your presentation and the amazing work that you're doing. And we will have time for Q&A after. And I just listening to it, you said a phrase, that the de-Judification of the Holocaust. And it's mind-boggling. And I remember 10 years ago, 12 years ago, speaking with Dan Michman and David Katz and other scholars of the Holocaust, and we were speaking about how some books divorce the issues of the Holocaust with anti-Semitism, or not just underestimate it, but just ignore it. It boggles the mind that this is passing as...
This is the voice of the future, unfortunately. And later on in the Q&A, I'll be delighted to talk about the undermining of the value of Jewish survivors' testimony.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Jan. So, Alex, the floor is yours, and really thank you for being here and all the amazing academic and legal work that you're doing on these issues. So, nice to see you.
Unmuted now. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I think that by now Jan can also lead the legal part of the presentation very well, because he was forced to get familiar with the legal aspects of dealing with the past. Or perhaps we should use this description used by Yehuda Bauer, usable past. So I will try to explain with the example of Professor Grabowski and Professor Engelking case, how this usable past was translated into the language of law, or even more into the language of actually litigation and going to the court, and trying to distort the Holocaust memory there, because and perhaps I should start with it, that very often, and in particular abroad, people are convinced that the case of Professor Grabowski and Professor Engelking was based on this famous or infamous Holocaust bill of 2018. But this is not the case. We all remember what happened then when the bill was first, so the amendment to the law on the Institute of National Remembrance was announced. It was in June 2018, just on the eve of the International Day of Holocaust Remembrance. So in this initial amendment, there were even criminal law sanctions being written down. As I remember correctly, 2 or 3 years imprisonment, 3 years imprisonment for claiming, contrary to the facts and publicly, any involvement of Poles and the Polish nation into the crimes committed by the German Nazis during the Second World War. So later on, as we also all remember well, this whole international discussion started, and protests mostly from the side of Israel and US, and they all led to another amendment of the January Amendment. So the June Amendment to the law on the Institute of National Remembrance, that actually took away this this criminal law sanction, but left, as Jan said, the civil law possibility to go after also Holocaust scholars. Just to add, all this process of amending the law, and in particular, this would happen in June, within hours, was in complete violation of the rules of proper legislation. But this, no one took care of this, of course. And I must say that I truly regret that Prime Minister Netanyahu took in a way part in this masquerade, because just hours after the amendment was announced in June, there was a common press conference by Prime Minister Netanyahu and Prime Minister Morawiecki, with this again infamous declaration of both governments that included some statements that were, for me, extremely controversial. But this is, of course, for yet another discussion also on the way the law is being implemented now in Poland. But yes, let's leave it aside. So we are left now in Poland with this amendment from the June 2018 that actually it's meaningless. We should put it this way, I think, because I do not know a single case that would be brought to court and then litigated based on this law. So it only proves that this was actually all about political agenda and this memory policy that Jan also spoke about, and not about legal protection of the good name of Poland and Poles, which was the official reason given by the drafters of the amendment. But of course, it doesn't mean that the law is not being implemented against Holocaust scholars, also against other people involved, also civil society members, active members of the civil society that want to deal with the past and speak about the atrocities committed by the Poles against the Jews during the Second World War or after Second World War, after Holocaust. So the legal instrument that is being most often invoked against such people and scholars, and also Professor Grabowski and Professor Engelking, is the construction of personal rights. That is an instrument of civil law. So what are personal rights? Well, these most traditional, I would say, personal rights are good name, reputation, or privacy, right to your image, etc. So these are like classical personal rights. But in Poland, since a few years, there have been new personal rights being added to this catalog, which is an open catalog. So actually it is being formed and shaped by the court rulings. But these new personal rights are, for example, national pride. So the right to national pride, or the right to national identity, or even, as it happened in one of the cases, right to history without lies. So just to translate it in a very direct way. So first, it is really doubtful if such rights should exist and should be invoked in courts, and in particular, like this right to history without lies. It's extremely controversial. But these concepts are being more and more abused in order to introduce, with the use of law and with the use of court rulings, one particular vision of history, which is, as already Jan said, the vision where the Poles are portrayed and presented only as victims or saviors of others and never perpetrators of former atrocities. So before I will get to the case of Professor Engelking and Professor Grabowski and the book There Is Still Night, Jan, is this the correct translation? Because there have been many others present.
The book will be soon out and published in English, and the title is Night Without End.
Night Without End. Mm-hmm. A beautiful title and a beautiful book, even though Minister Czarnek claims it's an anti-Polish rag. Minister Czarnek said it publicly today or yesterday. So I would like to mention the case of Frankfurter Rundschau, a German newspaper. So the newspaper wrote a piece about, the piece criticized the Polish official national historical policy. And the article claimed that Poles or the government, Polish government, presents Holocaust only from the perspective of purely German atrocity. So Mr. Świrski, who is an important person in these discussions because he is the head of Polish Anti-Defamation League or League Against Defamation, and this organization stands behind many lawsuits of this kind, and also behind the lawsuit against Professor Grabowski and Professor Engelking. So the head of this organization, Mr. Świrski, sued the newspaper, the Frankfurter Rundschau, claiming that his personal rights were violated. So we should distinguish this case, from example, from the cases where former inmates of concentration camps go against newspapers or other media using this phrase Polish concentration camps. Of course, some of them may use it only applying it to the geographical dimension of the place where the camps were based, but if I were to claim that someone has any right to say that his or her personal rights were violated by the fact of using the term Polish concentration camp, then I would claim that these are the former inmates of such camps, but not Mr. Świrski, who is a person of, I don't know, 55 years old or so, even though I do not know. So I apologize if he's hearing us and he could feel offended by my estimation of his age. So in the case of Frankfurter Rundschau, Mr. Świrski against Frankfurter Rundschau, the court actually said that yes, his rights were violated by the fact that the newspaper criticized the Polish attitude towards Holocaust, presenting it as purely German atrocity. And the court said that Mr. Świrski's national identity and good name as a Pole were violated, because he professionally is engaged in protection of the good name of Poland by his involvement in the organization Polish Anti-Defamation League. I think it's an extremely dangerous trend if the courts are allowing such interpretation of personal rights. And now getting to the case of Professor Engelking and Professor Grabowski. And I think it will be also first time when Jan hears this. So the written reasoning of the court, because as we know, the judgment was announced in February 9th. So it is already there. It has been prepared, but we haven't received it yet. So it has been sent by the court. So everything I will be now telling you about the court ruling in the first instance is only based on the oral reasoning of the court given during the court hearing when the judgment was announced, because we haven't seen the written reasoning yet. So the court dealt with the case that was brought against Professor Grabowski and Professor Engelking, co-editors of the book There Is Still Night, for the part of the book, actually it was the chapter written by Professor Engelking, where there were statements concerning Mr. Malinowski, the mayor of a small town or a village during the Holocaust. And Professor Engelking was referring to the testimonies by Estera Rogicka, a Holocaust survivor, that she gave many years after Holocaust for the Holocaust Museum in Washington. So she gave the testimonies where she spoke about Mr. Malinowski as someone who was co-responsible for the death of the Jews during the Holocaust, because he brought the Germans to the place where the Jews were in hiding, or he indicated the place where the Jews were in hiding. So, so the niece of Mr. Malinowski, Miss Filomena Gliszczyńska, who is 81 years old, she brought a lawsuit against Professor Engelking and Grabowski, claiming that her personal rights were violated because they have infringed her right to honor the memory of the late member of her family. And she also brought the claims concerning national identity and national pride and this history without lies. So this was also part of the arguments brought against both professors. And it was clear from the very beginning, and it was public knowledge, that actually the organization that stands behind Ms. Gliszczyńska and this lawsuit is the Polish Anti-Defamation League, headed by Mr. Świrski, whom I referred to describing the Frankfurter Rundschau case. So they supported her, providing with legal representation, and of course all the media campaign directed against Professor Grabowski and Professor Engelking. So the court, in the first instance judgment announced on February 9th, stated that the rights of personal rights of Ms. Gliszczyńska were violated. And it was, and it is, I think, one of the most important verdicts, court verdicts so far in the whole field of memory and memory of the Holocaust in particular, given during the democratic free Poland. But the court, and I think it's important, actually limited its judgment, its statement on the violation of personal rights to this right to honor the memory of the late members of family. The court dismissed these charges or these claims about the violation of this national identity, pride, etc. Elements. So this is actually very good. But still, it cannot be claimed that this judgment does not enter into the sphere of history. And I think that the court actually played here the role of historians, because, and this is very important in this case, there were two testimonies given after the war by Ms. Filomena Gliszczyńska, to whose words Professor Engelking refers in her chapter. So one testimony was given in defense of Mr. Malinowski, Mayor Malinowski, and this testimony was given almost right after the war. And with this testimony, where Ms. Rogicka actually lied to save the life and fate of Mr. Malinowski, who could be accused of denouncing the Jews. So she actually, we can claim that in a way she saved his life. But many years after, when she was in a completely different situation, not in the Soviet-occupied Poland, but in a safe environment where she gave the hours-long testimony in the Holocaust Museum, she actually changed her testimony and said the truth, said what happened, said what she really thought about Mr. Malinowski's actions during the Holocaust. So the court actually dismissed this second testimony and concentrated on the first testimony given after the war in this court proceedings that had nothing to do with the rule of law. Actually, there were no conditions in the after-war Poland to have a proper court hearings and trials under these circumstances. So actually, the court entered into the role of a historian, and this is extremely dangerous also for the next cases of this kind. And there are next cases, and there will be more and more cases of this kind. And perhaps I should add here, which is also important, that we also have in the Polish Criminal Code a separate provision that deals with public insult to the state or nation. And this provision is, and of course here 2 years imprisonment punishment is included, and this provision is also being used against, for example, journalists dealing with the Holocaust past, etc. So it all creates an atmosphere where the chilling effect is not even, there is not a danger, you know, that there's not a risk of chilling effect. This chilling effect is being already imposed. So now when we will get the written reasoning of the court, we will of course appeal. So the verdict is not final. And also what is important is that Ms. Filomena Gliszczyńska demanded 100,000 zloty from Professor Engelking and Professor Grabowski, which is quite a lot in Polish conditions. But the court of the first instance actually dismissed this claim. But we have no guarantee, of course, what the judgment of the Court of Appeal will be. And I think I will close here, but just with adding one remark. Just after the verdict, of course, the internet exploded, and the Polish right-wing pro-government media were extremely involved in announcing the victory of Polishness and the good name of Poland and Poles being saved with this verdict. And I'm fine with this in the sense of free speech and participation of media or commentators in the public debate on this important judgment and important case. What absolutely bothers me is the fact that Minister Zbigniew Ziobro, Minister of Justice and Prosecutor General in one person, expressed himself very openly and publicly in defense of this judgment, claiming that this is actually a victory of the honor of the Polish nation, etc. I don't recall exactly his words, but this was in absolute approval of the judgment. So we can. I'm asking this question: what kind of fair trial guarantees are there, and what kind of impact and influence on the court of second instance, of the Court of Appeal, when the head of the Ministry of Justice is actually praising the verdict of the court of the first instance? It should never happen. It happens more and more in Poland nowadays with the destruction of the rule of law combined, unfortunately. So I will stop here, and of course I'm happy to answer any questions that the audience may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you. Thank you both. Natan, would you like to ask? We have several questions that people have been texting.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. It was fascinating. It was very interesting. I'm sorry. I will have to go soon to the other Zoom. But first of all, it was very informative for both of you. Thank you very much. Second, my question is, what are these amazing polls that you, Professor, mentioned in the beginning, that people are saying that Polish people suffered more than Jews, and that professors or historians should be punished? It sounds like loyal Soviet citizens in the good old days, but there were two generations of the Soviet power who was working on it. How so quickly there can be such a public opinion in Poland?
Well, it's not. Yeah, thank you for the question. It's not as quickly as you think. It has been growing over the last, I would say, even 2 decades. This very, very, I would say, possessive attitude towards own history and towards own ethos and towards own myth of national, as I mentioned, innocence. And unfortunately, in large segments of Polish society, due to school curricula as well, which are very, very strange in this aspect, there is an idea that this part of history is actually not history, but it's rather treated like a religion. And if someone, you know, throws in the face of your religion something, it's not a place of you know, logical discussion. It's a place of feelings and knee-jerk reactions. So that's best I can answer in a few moments.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Alex, do you want to respond to Natan's comment, or? Sorry, you're on mute.
Again,
Thank you.
I think that Jan explained this very well. This is about emotions, and this is also what's very dangerous when it comes to law. That actually these feelings are being translated into the language of law and legal provisions. I see it as a very dangerous trend generally, and listening to these results of these polls that Jan mentioned, you know, it's heartbreaking for me as a Pole. I can put it this way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to ask a question. Maybe it's a bit provocative. Elie Wiesel used to speak about how Holocaust denial and revisionism was almost a sense of re-murdering. You murder the victim, you murder the Jew during the Holocaust, and now you try to murder the memory. So it's almost a second act of murder. But my question is, and it's a bit provocative perhaps, you know, in liberal societies like Canada, in South Africa, certain things were done to indigenous people, to native people, and the bigness of liberal democratic societies are to apologize for the deeds of the past. The deeds are done, we commemorate them, we erect statues, and we try to incorporate it into our public and political discourse and history. We remember the indigenous people, we remember what happened in apartheid South Africa, we remember the genocides. So in terms of the Holocaust, how important is this? And I'm asking in a provocative sense. Here you have a society that exterminated its population. More than 3 million Jews were exterminated systematically, 1 million children. The remaining population that was there before the war were able to escape. Some escaped to Israel, to America, etc. Should we be surprised that if a society could do this to its own people, that now, a couple of generations later, they're trying to erase the history that's been written about the Holocaust? And in a sense, the Jewish people are good at history. We've become, I know in different parts of the world, Israel, Yad Vashem, the Jewish people have become leaders in helping other people to remember their histories. In Rwanda, in other parts of the world, in Bosnia, historians of the Holocaust, Yad Vashem, and other Holocaust museums have come to the assistance of other peoples that have experienced these tragedies. And we're good at memory, we're good at history. The Jewish people, we know our history. So at one level, in a provocative way, how important is this that Poland is now trying to erase a part of its history? Is this important at some level?
I would say it's of crucial importance, and it goes beyond the Polish borders. Now, when you mentioned other, let's say, societies, by and large, democratic societies with deep democratic roots and strong democratic institutions have a very complex, but they have a road to certain kind of coming to terms with their own history. In illiberal societies, in authoritarian regimes, this is much more complex. And actually, when you look at the way in which European societies dealt with the history with the legacy of the Holocaust, it's of fundamental importance when you look at Western Europe, which by and large, not with enthusiasm, mind you, and slowly, painstakingly, but even places like Holland, which were actually fiercely rejecting the idea of complicity, they came finally to the idea in last 2 decades, actually 3 decades, let's say 2 decades even, there is a consensus in Western Europe that we Europeans have made our own contribution, that we share some part, a small part perhaps, or some part of a blame, of a burden, of responsibility for the tragedy of the Holocaust. Now, in Eastern Europe, where actually the Holocaust physically occurred, and in Poland, where half of all victims of the Holocaust had Polish passports, my goodness, there is something called competing victimhood. In other words, our suffering has to be recognized. And if we recognize our own role, it will take in suffering of even more vulnerable minorities, and especially the Jews during the Holocaust. We shall somehow compromise our own, let's say, standing in history. So you have Ukraine, in Lithuania, in Poland, nowadays even in Hungary, in Romania, you have different scenarios, but overall you have a rejection of any idea, kind of co-responsibility of coming to terms with something that historians have identified as an uncontested truth. So this competing victimhood is perhaps at the basis of this rejection, of or unwillingness to come into terms with one's own history. And it's very dangerous, I think.
I would add that, well, not in defense of the Polish nation. I don't think that the Polish nation needs such defense or wants such defense, but we were never taught how to deal with the past, and I think that this is one of the crucial aspects. And this is, of course, because of the communist times and staying under another regime, that the Western societies were not part of this experience. But also after the change of the system, the introduction of the democracy in Poland, there were not many attempts to start talking about the common history, and of course this feeling of being a victim that no one actually takes care of was growing for years too, and perhaps this unwillingness to deal with the past is a result of actually this non-existence of this topic, of this problem, of the discussion, also at schools, which is crucially important. So I think that if this could be changed, then perhaps also these attitudes towards the history were different. And I can only hope it will happen one day, that even with the kids, we'll start talking about what happened, because also it's important to state that it's not that this could only be, could only happen in Poland, that Poles were involved in crimes committed against the Jews because they were Poles. It's not this way. There were so many other nations whose members were murdering Jews and betraying them. So perhaps talking about it in a broader perspective would also help Poles to deal with the past. But I'm not an expert in education or history, but these are my impressions only.
Okay, thank you. We have several important questions. If we can go on for another 15 minutes, is that okay with both of you? Okay, good. Okay, so Nathan Lewin, a legal expert, asks, and I think this is important, a potentially legal question. Has anyone examined whether Dr. Grabowski has a claim he could bring to the U.S. District Court under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act against Poland for tortious damage or loss of property in the United States, i.e. for sales of his book? This is a difficult and imaginative claim and may be expected by other provisions of the FSIA, but maybe should be explored. So I think it'd be great if you think there's a possibility there. It'd be wonderful if you can speak to Mr. Lewin. What do you think?
highly interesting, but completely unknown to me, the provision and the connection that we could make. But I'll definitely check this.
Well, to be honest, if I can jump in here, I have another lawsuit which is looming on the horizon, which is hopefully underway. I have been one of the NGOs aligned and financed by the Polish government tried to get me expelled from my work at University of Ottawa. And then I consulted a lawyer whether I could file a legal case. And the problem is it's possible, but it's prohibitively expensive. And salaried workers, let's say, of science, such as myself, it's beyond usual reach, especially struggling against organizations funded by a foreign state. But of course, it is something that I probably will need to explore in the months or years to come. Who knows?
So Ira, who's listening, it would be great if you can put Mr. Lewin and Alex and Jan together by email. You never know. Okay, we have another question from Barbara Wind, who's a colleague and a scholar on the history of the Holocaust. And she writes that in 1997, she attended a conference at the Vatican on good and evil after Auschwitz and had the distinct feeling that some clerics in the hall at the Pontifical University were intent on de-Judaizing the Holocaust. In fact, it would be another crucifixion with Judeo-communism as the Antichrist. Thus, I wonder if or how the Church is involved in supporting the effort by the current Polish government as a Catholic country. Is there a role of the Church in this issue?
Ola, do you want to take this one? Or do you want?
I think that because of Polish Catholic Church is now involved in other fights, more concentrated on LGBTQ plus question. I haven't noticed the involvement that would be directed at our case or similar cases of Polish Anti-Defamation League. But I think that there is something behind, and in a larger perspective, there is, of course, the role of the Polish Catholic Church in the way that the Poles remember or don't want to remember the Holocaust and this what happened. But Jan will know better.
And Ola, I can jump in here very briefly. There are in Polish Catholic churches, generally speaking, extraordinarily conservative and nowadays closely aligned with the ruling nationalists. And for instance, when the Minister Ziobro, about whom Ola just mentioned, told about his intervention in our trial, in his, let's say, praise for the verdict, he actually delivered the speech he went on a broadcaster called Radio Mary, which is the voice of most, I would say, conservative, often deeply anti-Semitic part of public opinion. It's church-owned. It's church-owned, and the same thing happens in so-called TV iPurdue or Trwam, Telewizja Trwam, which is the same kind of church-sponsored, church-owned TV station, which is very popular with older folks, and which took part in a very vicious part of this campaign against our book. So it's not, let's say, the official position of the church, but if you scratch the surface, you will find them there too.
I'm so naive that I still tend to distinguish between Polish Catholic Church and Radio Maria and but perhaps I shouldn't.
So Roland Bauman asks, Jan, when is the book Night Without End coming out? When will it be published?
The thing is, the book is ready for production and has been now in the works for a year and a half or two, and it's a joint publication effort undertaken by Yad Vashem and Indiana University Press. I'm waiting for the final word from the editor-in-chief of Indiana, who is producing it. I know, for instance, from Yad Vashem, however, that the infamous and notorious Institute of National Remembrance send a letter to Yad Vashem Hashem to make them reconsider or withdraw their support for that publication. So this is the way the nationalists operate nowadays. But hopefully the book will be out before summer. My hope is that it will be out before the summer.
Wonderful. And Roland Bowman also asks, do you think that the IPN and its cohorts of PIS supported historians will manage to fully reverse what was accomplished 20 years ago after the publication of Jan Gross's book on Gendawab and the research done back then with the support of the IPN and Leon Chris? Will there be counter-revolution succeed, or did it fully conquer the field already? Should we be pessimistic about the future of historians and history of Poland?
It's partly a question of so-called futurology, which is not the best way to ask a historian. The thing is, I don't know what will happen in the future. I can evaluate the past, I can look at the present, and looking at the past and looking at the present and the trends which I see, I'm very pessimistic. I'm seeing this what Dr. Aleksandra mentioned, Ola mentioned, which is the chilling effect, which is felt already. The question of choices, which young people will do in terms of not studying these delicate parts of history. Now, whether I don't think they will be able to explain to all of us that Holocaust, let's say, was just a theater of Polish virtue. But the thing is that what makes me think that we have a working chance here is that this particular part of Polish history, which is the Holocaust, does not belong to Polish government, okay? Does not belong to Polish nationalists. So here all of us, the reason we sit here today and discuss it is because we are, as citizens of the world, are concerned about it. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to defend history, but this will be a difficult struggle. It will be a difficult struggle because we are dealing here for the first time in history with the force, well, since Soviet times, okay, with the full force of a large state devoting its resources to distorting a very vital part of history. So we'll see.
I'm also not very optimistic, but because of that, I would only see the chance in international outcry and reactions and supporting scholars like Professor Grabowski, Professor Engelking, and other scholars dealing with the past and with history, and the involvement of international organizations and international audience in defense of actually freedom of historical research and historical truth. On the legal part, I see the enormous role of the courts, of free courts, to judge and decide about such cases in a manner that actually reflects not only legal rules, but also the true understanding of legal provisions and the meaning of law. Which is more and more difficult also because an unprecedented attack and assault on the rule of law and judicial independence in Poland. We have to keep it in mind that this is not only one small part of the plan being introduced now in Poland with the change of the whole system, not only the minds of the people, but also the legal system, etc. It's a broader plan of that is being implemented right now. So we are all under pressure, and this is why I see a chance in the international reaction towards this. What's happening, what we are experiencing.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few more minutes. I'll combine two questions. One is from Susan Aronoff, and she asks, what role do you think that fear for demands for financial reparations and return of property plays in the denial of the Holocaust or denial of history? Would it be helpful for us to say up front that no such demands will be made on post-Holocaust Poles or other complicit countries in order to move to the catharsis of confronting their past more honestly? It's an interesting question. And the other question I'd like to ask is from Ellen Masters. She says, thank you for your amazing and important work. Can you please discuss how exactly Holocaust survivors' testimonies are being undermined?
Okay. Two very good questions. We don't have much time, so we'll be very, very brief. Now, fear of reparations, removing fear of reparations. No, I don't think so. This is a bogeyman. This is one of the actually issues for this Senate proposition 447, which had no legal, let's say, importance or weight in Poland, was carried away by nationalists and anti-Semites. But in absence of this, they would find something else. So I wouldn't attach much importance to it. Now, about Holocaust testimony, this is a very serious thing, and we don't have the time even to deal with it. Just to tell you a few words about it, what happens now is an ongoing and a very strong push to undermine the quality of this Jewish testimony. How you do it? Well, mostly what you heard here in this case, for instance, it's turning attention to documents of very dubious value produced in very, very strange or suspect circumstances in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s in Poland, which are supposed to be a counterweight to the Jewish testimony. And for instance, now Pilecki Institute stresses the importance of the 1960s and 1970s documents and testimonies sent from Poland to Germany, in which you can see a very different kind of occupation, which the authorities, Polish authorities, wanted to send to German courts in 1960s and 70s. So to give an example, if you were to take these documents at face value, they basically were purged of any kind of Polish complicity. So if you were to analyze the Jedwabne mass murder, the documents which from 1960s, which had been sent by Polish authorities back then to West Germany, did not indicate that even one single Pole took part in this mass murder. So this is the kind of evidence which now the organizations of the Polish state, the institutions such as Pilecki, are trying to bring to the table in order to invalidate the Jewish testimony. But there is much more. I don't have the time to go any deeper. Sorry.
Alex?
I don't have anything to add on this.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna, if I may, I'll ask one more question. Professor Louis Fleischman just sent in a question, and he says, millions of Poles were killed during the Second World War, including civilians. Can the Polish government compromise on teaching the Holocaust as it really happened, as long as the suffering of the Polish people is also recognized? Can we teach the Holocaust along with the suffering of non-Jewish population, even though the circumstances of their death or murder were different?
Well, I guess this is a question we'll have to ask Polish government. I don't think that I am in position to be a spokesperson for the Polish authorities, so sorry.
But the same here. But I think that this should be actually something very obvious, that we teach these two simultaneously. There is no contradiction. And the suffering of Poles was enormous, incredible. And no one should really say anything. And no one is saying anything else or against this. So actually, this is only about the current Polish government allowing the full truth to be presented and not only just part of it.
Okay, so Alex and Jan, thank you very much for taking the time to be here. And more importantly, thank you for your very important scholarly work and for taking principled stands on very, very important and profound issues. So continued strength, and you should have success.
Thank you very much for this invitation, and have a very nice and very good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.